Cameras in the last few years have gained an incredible amount of capability. The cameras are smarter than ever with speed, with autofocus detection modes, with 24, 50, or even over 60 million pixels depending on the camera. Along with that comes large files. And that's what I want to talk about today. I have had so many viewers ask about dealing with large files. There are many considerations beyond the camera itself. So in this video, I'll discuss workflow, storage, backups, and how I've handled the transition to these newer cameras with large file sizes. I have some good news for you, but I also have a little bit of bad news. Before we get into this video, I want to let members know that the next several videos in my Beginner's Guide to Classic Portraiture course are now live. We are learning about camera settings in detail in the videos that I am launching today. I will link to the course in the description below. If you aren't familiar with my courses or membership on my channel, for my channel members, I offer full-length courses, photography ebooks, and extensive behind-the-scenes content. Members make this channel possible, so the membership perks are my way of giving back to my most loyal supporters. There is a link in the description to find out more about membership. Back to the matter at hand though. For a bit of background, with my Nikon D300S that I had just purchased when I started this channel a little over 10 years ago, the file size for an uncompressed 14-bit RAW file was approximately 25 megabytes. And using that highest quality option slowed the camera down. No doubt it was an ambitious specification for the camera. Jumping ahead to today, at my top quality RAW settings, my Nikon Z7 is approximately 85 megabytes, my Leica Q2 is upwards of 85 megabytes, and my Sony a7R IV is about 120 megabytes per image file. Let me say that again. Yes, one image, 120 megabytes. Those are the extreme end of those things. Those three cameras all have high pixel count full frame sensors, but cameras like these are the biggest challenge. Oh, and then there's 4K video files. Sometimes 8-bit video, and now 10-bit video, and now even 12-bit video on our Z7. Yeah. Raymond and I recently went on our first Camp Astro of 2020. And if you don't know what Camp Astro is, I will link the video to that trip in the description. But for now, just know that we took a ridiculous number of photos and video with a number of different cameras, including our phones and our drones. Now, we didn't shoot in uncompressed 14-bit RAW files on all of our cameras, and we took advantage of small RAW on the Nikon Z7, but we still came back with over 200 gigs on our memory cards. And that was one night. This is not unusual for us. Considering that we shoot a ton and we love our time lapses, I've had quite a bit of experience with working with thousands of large files from a single day. No doubt it's an adjustment from a more typical workflow. I'm going to share my best tips so far, including what I have done to manage these increasingly large files. The first thing to think about is the file type and the file size that you are recording, both photo and video. It's easy to switch over to uncompressed 14-bit RAW and 4K video or 1080p at 120 frames per second because those are the biggest and the baddest, right? They give you the most to work with in post-processing. And that may be appropriate sometimes, but is it always necessary? The file that you are recording is my first suggestion for a place to look. Before we get there though, let's just rip the Band-Aid off with the bad news, shall we? If you want to set your camera to uncompressed 14-bit RAW and leave it there, and you want one of these newer high pixel count cameras, the only thing that you can really do other than taking fewer photos is to have fast, high capacity memory cards, a high powered computer with a ton of storage, and then if you back up your images, storage for that too. Now that being said, I do have one suggestion for you folks that we'll get to in a moment, but first, moving on with how to modify your workflow. Okay, for those of you not married to the idea of uncompressed 14-bit RAW, I have a few questions for you. Does your camera have a compression option for RAW files, or can you go to 12-bit RAW? Some cameras have lossless compressed options or a small RAW option. My Nikon Z7 has both of those. Compression and a decreased bit depth will decrease your file size, but you will retain very reasonable flexibility in the editing process. I most often shoot in lossless compressed 14-bit RAW when I want to shoot RAW. On my Z7, that means that my file size shrinks from 85 megabytes to 56 megabytes. Still a large file, but better, especially if you multiply that difference over hundreds or even thousands of images. On the same note, do you need to be shooting RAW? Or will JPEG do the job for any given situation? Remember that 85 megabyte RAW file from the Q2? If you use large JPEG instead, the file size shrinks to less than 11 megabytes, so about 1/8 the size. And you can step down to medium JPEG at less than 7 megabytes, or even JPEG small at about 4 megabytes. Can you harness your knowledge of photography and the smarts of that fancy camera, set things like white balance correctly, use any lighting optimizers that are available in camera, you know, those options that help bring out detail in shadows and in highlights? For Nikon, this is called active delighting. On most cameras, you can also modify the colors, the contrast, the sharpness with one color management setting, like for landscapes or for portraits, or even go monochrome. You can still edit JPEG images, but some of those things like colors and contrast are baked in to the image file, and you will have less flexibility when editing. But if you do it right, envision what you want the finished product to look like before pressing that shutter release, and you make those settings adjustments, you might get most of the way to your goal. I mean, every situation is different and we all have a different idea of what a finished photo looks like, but I could stand to shoot in JPEG more often, perhaps even to kind of sharpen the axe in the field, so to speak. Okay, speaking of editing, if you do want to record your images to RAW, like I often do, here's what I do. Rather than save all of those RAW images on my hard drive and consequently on my backups, I have started to transfer the images to my computer, look at my images, edit the ones I like, and save those edits and maybe the associated RAW files, but then I'm deleting a lot of the RAW files, the ones I don't want. I know that for some of you, that's like burning the negatives. I get it. But for me, I simply don't need them all. This saves me storage space, which saves me money at the same time. I'm not gonna wake up one morning in 10 years and say, you know, I should go back and edit those RAW files from 2020. Rest assured, I can definitely be a digital hoarder, but it can feel good to peel off the Band-Aid and be fairly realistic about what I will and won't edit in the future. One thing I mentioned a minute ago when discussing uncompressed 14-bit RAW files is taking fewer photos. And while I don't typically shoot uncompressed 14-bit RAW files, I have checked myself here. I have made a concerted effort to take fewer photos. I don't mean I'm leaving my camera at home. I just mean that I'm more mindful about the photos that I take. I'm not just like snap, 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 snapping away. I'm just more deliberate. Maybe a little more like it was when you may have lived your life 36 film exposures at a time. The next thing to think about is storage. First, memory cards, your storage in camera. And if you have 2 card slots and like to shoot backup where the image writes to both cards at the same time, that's 2 cards to purchase. So certainly purchasing large capacity cards is helpful, or having extra cards with you, but don't forget the speed of the card. That makes a difference in how quick and responsive your camera is. The card needs to be able to write those large files to the card quickly in order to move on to the next photo. And then it also helps in transferring the files to the computer afterwards. Right now, I am using a 120 gig XQD card, which are the fastest cards on the market, in my Z7. I also have a few extras of varying sizes. And I use Sony Tough SD cards in all my other cameras. They are the fastest SD cards on the market right now. I have varying sizes of those as well, with my largest being 128 gigs. The cards are pricey, but well worth it if your camera is able to make use of them. Remember that different cameras will take different specifications of memory cards. UHS-1, UHS-2. So make sure that you check your camera's manual to make sure that you're not over or under buying on your memory cards. Now for storage outside of your camera. I do have an entire video on my storage and backups. Some of the equipment has changed a little bit, but the process is the same, so I will link to it in the description. Some quick notes on that though. My different computers automatically run backups to a couple of Synology RAID boxes. QNAP is another option as well. These aren't small external drives. These are commercial class, but user-friendly solutions for big storage and data redundancy. All of my images also go to offsite cloud storage. I use Amazon for that. Let's talk a little bit more about that bulk. Potentially that huge bank of forever storage that you may be consistently saving your artwork to. The files that you take off of your camera are not necessarily the ones that you need to put in forever storage. I put files on external drives to work with them first. You could use your computer's hard drive if you have enough space available, but because I am working with so many photo and video files at any given time, I have a variety of SSDs that are 1 or 2 terabytes each. So I work with those files and then I transfer what I want to my forever storage and backups. Then I can delete the working files. And let me clarify that because I have so many external hard drives. I do that because at any given time, I am literally working with terabytes of image files, video files, and photo and video libraries and different software. If you are not a full-time YouTuber, you may not have nearly as many video files in various stages of editing. So the amount of storage space that you will need will probably be different from me. And even if you do want external drives, if you aren't editing video from those drives, you may be fine with hard drives, which are much less expensive than SSDs, depending on how picky you are about speed overall. Storage is not the only thing that you need to think about with your computer. Your computer's overall performance is another thing. Having enough processing power is key. I have a MacBook Pro from 2018. I did purchase the fastest processor and largest RAM options. Only when I am dealing with thousands of raw images at a time, like with a time lapse, do I really notice any performance hiccups in terms of transferring files or editing. Even then, it's manageable. It just takes a little bit of patience. This idea of dealing with large file sizes on our cameras is certainly a first world problem. I am not going to complain that my fancy and expensive camera gives me files with too much information. I think the main thing to remember is to know when to utilize those large files and when to back up a bit and shoot in JPEG or small RAW if you have it. It's your call as to when that time and place might be, and it can never hurt to be more intentional about your photos as you're capturing them so you end up with fewer large files at the end of the day. For my own work, I have found that less can be more. Fewer, well-composed, well-thought-out shots can be more satisfying at the end of the day than thousands of rapid-fire images. Members, remember to check the description for the next portion of Classic Portraits course. Everyone, there are a few links linked down there below for you about how to learn more about my membership, my system for storage and backups. I'll put a link to my gear reviews playlist down there as well because I have reviews of all the cameras that I discussed in this video there as well. Please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.